Quite a bunch tonight, eh?
Well, it's cold.
Quite a bunch tonight, eh?
Well, it's cold. Kelly, you're going to need to go into YouTube and turn off the volume there, mute the sound in YouTube.
Thank you.
Oh. Hello, Eleanor.
Hi, Judy.
Hi, how are you?
Good, dear. How are you?
Good.
Put my volume up here.
I mute that.
Did you have a meeting yet, John, with Austin?
Yes, we did.
How did it go?
Went well. Tonight we're going to talk about all of the appointments that we fulfilled on the policing side so far, and there was nobody who wasn't supportive of the points that we raised.
I now call our meeting to order, November 3rd, 2020, time 6:30. Just a friendly reminder to keep yourselves on mute if you're not speaking, please. Kelly, you've taken the attendance. Approval of the agenda.
So approved, Dale.
Second it, Bob Powell.
Any discussion? Ready for the question? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Is there any conflict of interest for disclosure this evening? Adoption of the minutes, October 6th, 2020.
So moved, Mark Foreman.
Second by,
Chris Reinhardt.
any discussion? Ready for the question?
Question.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Adoption of the minutes from October 22nd, 2020.
Atkinson. So moved.
Second it, Bob Powell.
Any discussion? Ready for the question?
Question.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. We'll go on now to the committee reports, and this is where I would ask everyone to put themselves on mute if you're not speaking, please. The Policing Committee, Director Cassidy, please.
Good evening, everyone. Our Community Policing Committee report dated November 3rd, 2020. On September 24th, the committee hosted the advisory forum and heard from the RCMP about their first quarter report, a little behind they were. The meeting was called to order at 6:10. Paul Gallagher gave a Crime Stoppers review, which you got a copy of the report. JP McDougall then reviewed the quarterly report with the group, indicating COVID had a significant impact on their activities during that time, and that the COVID accommodations have affected the number of calls by increased reporting to the RCMP, and that there's a number. It's been impacted in many ways. Anyways, he advised the attendees that mental health factors largely related to COVID had an increasing impact on the calls that they've received. While there's not a corresponding increase evident in the report, that is because secondary factors are not tracked. Also noted with the difficulty in comparing drug data to previous pre-legislation periods, the legalization of cannabis has fundamentally changed drug enforcement, given that the so-called harder drugs are transported, held, and sold in a much more confidential circle. The executive director then reported on the progress he had made on direction given by the board, and that was to set up the meetings with the MLAs. He described to the group how a round of meetings has been arranged, which were canceled though by the provincial election call. After the results were known and MLAs sworn in, approaches were made to the regional MLAs. And as at the date of this writing, October 27th, meetings have been held with David Kuhn, Chris Austin, Dominic Carty, and Jeff Carr. Discussions are underway with Richard Ames and Ryan Collins. No response has come yet from Jill Green, Mary Wilson, or Ross Wetmore. Just an update, we haven't heard from Mary Wilson at this time. As this situation is fluid and developing, directors will be updated verbally about each discussion. So I move that the board receive the report of the Community Policing Committee dated November 3rd, 2020.
Second it, Bob Powell.
Any discussion? Ready for the question?
Question.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Susan. The Oversight Committee. Director Bigger, please.
Lips are moving, but I can't hear them.
You got to take yourself off of mute. You're still on mute.
There we go. Sorry,
Yeah. No, that's okay.
I'm old and gray. The Oversight Committee met on October 20th, 2020, myself and the chair, and Mark Foreman, Bev Forbes, board members, Don Fitzgerald, executive director, and Kelly Shaw. Board secretary was present. The meeting was called to order by myself at 10 a.m. The executive director spoke to the progress being made on the strategic goals at the end of the third quarter, and a copy of the summary is attached. The committee was satisfied the acceptable progress had been made and the outstanding goals were dealt with appropriately. During the discussion, it was noted that some of the goals were impacted by circumstances outside the commission's control, such as postponing of the municipal elections and the other COVID-related factors. Don will repeat this review with the board at its meeting, giving the directors opportunity to pose questions. Being no further business, the meeting was adjourned at 10:32 a.m. Respectfully submitted. I think, Madam Chair, Don could present, and then I'll make that motion after in case there's any questions that may come into play.
Sure. Okay, Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'd begin by bringing people up to date on what's happened since that meeting with respect to policing. So I'll just go through the meetings that we had and give a brief summary. The first meeting that we had was with David Kuhn. He was supportive. He's hearing from his constituents the same things that we find unsatisfactory with respect to policing, and he's hearing it from throughout the province when he talks to the rest of his caucus and his other contacts. And he had questions about alternate delivery. Look, if we're not really happy with this, is there some way to put together our own force, a regional force, perhaps put together a model that might be of interest to the city of Fredericton, and in terms of contracting service, and our response to that was that, you know, we have an open mind to it, but we're kind of a long way away from that. Chris Austin, kind of the same position. He did undertake to make sure that he'd raise this issue on the floor of the legislature. And at the time he said, provided the Premier gives the People's Alliance party status. So that's happened now. And so his kind of promise to us that was contingent on that has come to pass. And so we should give him a little bit of time before we reach out and perhaps maybe remind him of that. Next, we spoke with Dominic Carty, who he's very concerned about policing, but he was much more critical of the RCMP than the other meetings that we have had, and concerned about what they do, how quick, much more operationally. You could tell he was disappointed with the RCMP. And then we had a meeting with Jeff Carr, and he had kind of a similar take with respect to the RCMP. And it's occurred to me that they were both ministers in the last government, and maybe we're getting an insight into some friction between the government and the RCMP that's, outside of that we hadn't seen before. Before we just, all that we could see was public safety wasn't delivering to us the kind of service that we think that we should get, and perhaps that feeling's the same on the provincial level. So we asked all of them to push the Department of Public Safety to try and breathe some life into the more or less stalled study or review of policing in the province, and everyone said that they would. As the chair, as the committee chair said, we've since made contact and arranged a meeting with Minister Wilson, and that's going to take place this Friday. And I'm continuing to, so we're down to Joe Green and Ross Wetmore, where we haven't had any outreach. I'm going to give it another shot before I kind of put my hand up and ask the relative mayors in those ridings. So that would be, the Stephen Hicks with regard to Joe Green, and Mike Blaney with regard to Ross Wetmore, to see if we can sort of get them interested in hearing from us. So that was policing. And by the way, I'll take questions at any time through this presentation. So if you have one, just unmute yourself and fire away, and because if you have it, likely others do as well. But if you look at the information package, which details my strategic goals, which are your strategic goals, the first one is to kind of keep you up to date with respect to legislative analysis and briefing. And in the last quarter, that was really slow because everyone inside the provincial bureaucracy and the elected members could see the trajectory that we were headed towards an election, and things just really kind of came to a grinding halt. I think that this next quarter will be much busier, and for the reasons that we talked about early, the separation of work at environment and local government, the addition of climate change in the title of the Environment Department, the addition of local governance reform on the local government side. So the government has a mandate, has a majority, and my sense is that they're going to move quickly towards some of the things that they've talked about. What, on the local government side, the first thing that we've heard is some type of democracy or voting system inside unincorporated areas. On the environmental side, that impacts the landfill. The PPP initiative is gathering momentum again. We can look forward to, I think, seeing something in the near term about a new provincial waste management strategy, which is long overdue. So I think that we'll have a lot to talk about that going forward. Board development, well, the orientation for a new strategic plan, that's something we're going to have to take on in 2021, post-election, post the municipal election. We did place the cyber insurance that we talked about at the last meeting, and I had undertaken, I forget who posed the question about what municipalities are doing in that regard. I did reach out to all the CAOs in the region. A number of them are looking at it for 2021. The only municipality that has cyber coverage at this time is New Maryland, and they've had it for a couple of years, and they haven't had to use it. So I thought that we were the trailblazers in the region, but I guess we're Avis. We're number 2, and we're trying harder. But anyway, that's where that stands, and I suspect that nationally, more and more municipalities will be looking at that risk area and trying to mitigate it. The adoption of an updated 5-year plan was one of our goals, and that has been through the Finance Committee and has their support, and you'll be hearing about that later in the meeting this evening. With respect to climate change, we were looking at what role can the Commission play in climate change in our region, and we thought that would be an initiative in the new strategic plan for the board, for the new board that comes on side. And so obviously, rather than doing that in 2020, that'll be a 2021 thing. But we've done a survey. We surveyed communities in our region, and we have some data to begin with, and we have time to sort of further polish that. So, and we'll be looking on that. The other one with respect to operations was the landfill environmental impact assessment. And
Don, I'm sorry, it's Peter.
Yes, Peter.
On number 3, what sort of response have you had to the survey to date?
It's been light. We're circling back to municipalities and service district advisory committees saying, are you aware of it? But I think we have 10 to 12 responses at this time from a distribution list of about 38 or 39.
But you're sending out reminders, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
And whenever surveys,
I know.
when you're always disappointed with the response, with the level, the number of responses, but we have time, and we're persistent. So we hope to get up in the 90% return rate before we actually start to work on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
That's the survey that was sent out 3 or 4 weeks ago that some of us, including myself, completed.
I'm not certain if, yeah, I believe that's the case, Carson. I'd have to refresh my memory. If it's 3 or 4 weeks ago, that would have been the second round of that would be our first round of follow-up. Okay, I was on the landfill EIA, and perhaps what I'll do is I'll make sure at the end of each one I'll provide an opportunity so that so you don't have to sort of interrupt, because when I get going, I can, momentum is something. So the landfill EIA, we've done a lot of work on the landfill EIA, and it's going to be the centerpiece of our December meeting. We're going to make a presentation to you about what we've done so far, about what needs to be done, the scope of the impact assessment, and we're going to identify a role for the directors to play, that they can play as this process unwinds, and it'll have a public consultation phase. And as you know, the environmentalists will be interested, neighbors will be interested, people interested in preserving plant and animal life will be interested. And so we want to make you comfortable with what we're doing, provide you enough background, and really empower you to speak to the people in your communities if they have questions about that. So that's where we are on the impact assessment. The regional pool, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. There's a specific agenda item, and so I'll ask for your patience on that, and I'll speak to that a little later in the meeting. The last section has to do with effective communications. And, you know, there's only so much mind share. And in March, all kinds of things started to get squeezed out as we responded to COVID. And that's where people's heads were. And for a long time, that's all they wanted to talk about. We've continued to try and update and keep the directors abreast of what's going on. And this evening we're broadcasting this meeting live to the web, and we have some changes that we're going to make to that to try and be trying to be more available. We went through our regular budget process, trying to engage folks with respect to that. We hosted a Zoom meeting for the CAOs in the region. Candidly, it was a little disappointing. We had more staff on that Zoom call than there were CAOs who logged in. I don't know if that's an indication of lack of interest or real confidence in what we're doing. But you were only three communities represented in that briefing. And the one of the tools that we had been using and spending a lot of time on was the production of board notes quarterly, trying to give you know, a more conversational treatment of what happens than just the minutes. And we all know what was happening with board notes. We've done a survey 2 years ago. We did this. They're not being read, and they are being read by our board members who are at the meetings and really appreciate them. But then you folks know that anyway. I talked with the oversight committee. I suggested that the cost benefit for producing board notes is not there. And I suggested what we could do, and what we're recommending to you, is that rather than do that, and rather than have this meeting be on the web from 6:30 to 8:30 tonight, that we put our board meetings and committee meetings and leave them on the website that you can watch until the next one comes along. So finance, for example, is a committee that meets quarterly. So that meeting would stay up on our website for 90 days, and people would have the opportunity to go there and look at it whenever they wanted. Our board meetings would stay up for a month. It's much less labor intensive, and it actually discloses in more detail everything that we talk about and think about. So that's my idea there, and it's about trying to reduce the effort, but still make sure that information for those who are interested, that's available there. And I suspect going forward, if local government reform really starts to be something, and if it engages the service commissions, which the minister suggested to the EDs when he met with them that it would, people will be much more interested in not only our board meetings, but our committee meetings. So that's kind of my thought there. I'd like some input with respect to that. But that's my report with respect to where we are on my strategic objectives, which reflect your goals. And I take any questions that you have.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
cyber insurance, as Don mentioned, we did ours in the village 2 years ago.
Okay. I didn't get a response from you guys, Bev, but
No, I'll make sure you will.
But okay, but so no silver medal, but at least maybe bronze for us.
Mike Chamberlain here.
Mike, yes.
I continue to feel that the board notes are very important. And I know myself, I send them out to a few, to our advisory committees, and I'm sure probably the municipalities are doing the same thing. I find them very good and easily readable, and I'd like to see it continue.
Carson? You got to take yourself off of mute, Carson, if you're going to speak.
I thought I had. I think the idea that we should have the meetings stay up until the next meetings are shown, I think that's good in the quarterly reports as well. I think that's a good idea. And yes, these are circulated and these go to my counselors.
Anyone else have comments or questions for Don?
This is Peter Morrison. My only comment has to do with awareness. We prepare board notes. We're doing meetings with Zoom and all of that. And we're trying to engage the population, not just or the general population, not just board members and counselors and that sort of thing. My question is, what is the impediment? What can we do to engage more of the general population in reading the board notes, attending a Zoom meeting? That's pretty tough because you're looking at 2 hours from someone's time to sit there and listen. But the board notes in particular, and mine is more of a question, like what can we do to better engage the general public, because the counselors and the board members, we already know what's going on. So that's just a question.
It's a good one. I think it's fair to say that on every council, do the counselors know what's going on? I bump into counselors from different communities, and there's a wide range of familiarity with what's happening at the commission. In terms of what can we do, that's something that we've tread carefully with respect to reaching out to the general public. We discussed this at one of our workshops a couple of years ago, and particularly from the municipal side, there was some concern about the commission, being actively engaged in the local government communication challenge. I think this is your question, Peter. It's broad and it's deep, and it's something that I think that needs to be part of the new board's strategic plan. And we, from the staff perspective, we'll do whatever the board directs us to do, and what the board's preference is. I'm hearing tonight that the several board members are making good use of board notes. So, I started by saying, look, it takes a lot of time and effort, and my sense is that it's not being used. Well, if it's only being used in one or two places, we'll continue to do it because we want to equip you folks with whatever tools we can that assist you in your roles. So that's where we are with respect to board notes. With respect to a larger question, what's our role in terms of engaging the public? That's a good question, and it's not one that I have an immediate answer to, and it's one that I think collectively the commission's board should spend some time on, particularly as if developments start to unwind in terms of local government reform.
Right.
If I could just add, I think the board notes are also beneficial. It's hard enough to get counselors to read them, let alone get them to sit down to watch a video. I think it's easier to get them to read the board notes than that they'll sit. They're not, well, I shouldn't speak on behalf of all of them, but I wouldn't think that many of them would actually sit down and watch the 40 minutes of a committee meeting to the 2 hours of a board meeting. So I'd like to see them continue.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just from my perspective, I'll admit right up front, I don't make use of the board notes. I do a regular report to my council at each meeting on the previous RSC meeting, such as this evening that takes place. And that prompts discussions and any questions and so on. So in that sense, they're brought up to snuff, and it's entered into the public record at our municipal level. I think it's one of those questions where you can make all the attempts that you want. I think it's just a matter of if there's an avenue that's created for the public to access, then it's up to them if they decide to access it or not. And on that note, I would ask that if the board does find a solution, please let us know at the municipal level, because we dearly would love to have people come and be with us during our meetings, or in this environment, engage online with our meetings, because it's an ongoing struggle.
Mike
Yes,
Chamberlain.
Mike. Yes.
I just wanted to make the point that the local service districts, I think, are in a somewhat different position than the municipalities. We don't have regular meetings. We get the board notes and contribute them. And I just think we're in a different position than the municipalities are. Thank you.
And I agree with what Mike, Madam Chair, I agree with what Mike is saying. We have our advisory committee members, and we certainly share this information with them, but it's a slightly different concept, maybe a greatly different concept in municipal politics. And people tend to be, wherever they're in a municipal or an incorporated area or not, they tend to be complacent and let the leaders of the community take care of them until something happens. So, and I my question is just a question. I don't have any answers to it. How we make the community at large aware. But I think it's something that we all need to think about, and maybe collectively over the next number of weeks or years or something, find a way that we can do that. Because I talk to people and I say, oh, what does an RSC 11 do? And it's like, you give your head a shake and wonder why you even get involved.
So, Madam Chair, one of the ways it's been proved, one of the ways to determine how much people value things is to suggest that you take it away. And it's pretty clear to me, based on this conversation, that the board would like to see board notes continue, and so that will happen.
Madam Chair, speak to that too. I agree with the board notes. I like them, and I like the notes myself because I like to read them. But I know, as my counsel, I have my doubts if they are read, because many times they'll bring up questions that they should already have known that were on the board notes. But you know what I mean? But whether they do or not, I don't know. But I think it's important. But yet I do see where you're coming from, Don, too. I mean, I think it's a challenge. And I'll just leave it there as a challenge.
Don, I know that the board notes are shared with members of council by our CEO, and it's usually on the agenda. And if they have any questions to ask, then there's room for them to ask them questions. Usually there's not a lot of questions asked, though. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Don?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Don, what if you did a recap and just did a 5 or 10 minute video of you recapping it instead of the 40-minute or 2-hour sessions? If we just did a quick 5 or 10 minute recap of those board notes.
Yeah, we could do that. My feeling is that be an additive thing rather than a replacement. Over 10 years ago, before it was before people were ready for it. When I was at the city, we did a thing called Freddie News and Ask the Mayor, where we did podcasts before they really had the name podcasts, and it was before the people were ready for it. It's pretty easy to do, $30 webcam and a free YouTube channel, and it can get it done. So yeah, we can absolutely do that. And in terms of how to distribute it, it's a good idea.
Tag somebody else.
We'll look into that and come back to the board.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good idea, I think.
I'm just thinking, even if you tag somebody else in the video, like to do the video, it's just short, explosive information that people may be more engaged. At the rate that we're getting information in this day and age, to sit through 45 minutes or half an hour may be too much on people,
Yeah.
But that quick impact Cole's note version as an option.
Yeah, and I take your point, Chris. Whoever does it will certainly have hair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah. Don, I think part of the lack of engagement is the fact that the commission's doing a pretty good job. Our society we live in now, people love controversy. So unless you want to engage a bunch of people, you may have to do something fairly controversial, like we do at the city, some stupid things every once in a while. So, I mean, you just keep sending out the notes you do the best you can. And until something really becomes, really meaningful to everyone, you're probably not going to get a lot of engagement. It's just, unfortunately, that's kind of the world we're living in right now. But with governance reform, I mean, that could be just around the corner. Who knows how that's going to look.
Any further questions or comments?
Madam Chair, if there's no more comments, I'd like to move that the board receive the report of the Oversight Committee dated November 3rd, 2020.
And I second that motion. Peter.
Any discussion? Ready for the question?
Question.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, John. We'll go on now to the Finance Committee. Director Morrison, please.
Okay, excuse me, the Finance Committee met on October 20th, 2020. In attendance were, you have the report in front of you. The meeting was called to order by the chair at 5:03 p.m. We're very precise. The meeting began with a review of the third quarter performance of the post-closure fund. At the end of the quarter, our investments were in compliance with the allocation targets. And for the year to date, the fund is essentially in a break-even position. This performance mirrors the overall market. The executive director's more detailed staff report is attached to this document. Our investment advisor, Tony Spares, then discussed the market expectations for the next term, which could be summarized as continuing volatility and until at least the completion of the U.S. election process, which could be finished tonight or a month from now, I guess. The committee then turned its attention to the third quarter operating results for all divisions, which are also attached to this report and summarized in the financial overview. In summary, the divisions are operating as expected, with all but power generation on target to exceed their budgets. Staff advised that they are beginning to work to forecast year-end positions to develop reserve recommendations for the board to consider in December. The rest and bulk of the meeting was spent reviewing the staff recommended 5-year plan. Later in this meeting, that plan will be presented to the board for its consideration with the unreserved support of the committee. There being no further business, the meeting was adjourned at 6:26 p.m. Respectively submitted by myself. I move that the board receive the report of the Finance Committee dated November 3rd, 2020.
Seconded.
Any discussion? Ready for the question?
Question.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Peter.
You're
We'll
welcome.
move now to number 7, the regional pool update, a verbal report. Don, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to give the committee, the board, heads up that the working group has completed its efforts, and all of the input is with the consultant. And in the next 10 days, I expect to have in my hands the finished product. And what will happen at that point is I'll share that with the working committee and the participating communities. And you know, that will end our involvement in this phase of the regional pool initiative. I don't know what will happen from there. I don't know where it will fit in terms of priorities of the participating communities. But you know, we'll be there to help again if they wish, if we can provide value. The report will recommend a location, will recommend a size and a scope of a pool. It will identify the next steps that need to happen in this process, and I will be sharing that with the board in the December meeting, and you know, I'll deal with it in more detail. And but I can tell you, it's been a very interesting process. One that was interrupted by COVID. And fortunately, we had our public consultation wrap up just prior to the quarantine phase of COVID. And we were able to continue on, although not as quickly as we had hoped. So, I guess if I was in the movie business, I'd say this is the trailer for the pool movie. So much more detail coming on that in the December meeting.
Any questions for Dawn or comments? Thank you, Dawn. The third quarter tender report, that's for information only. We'll move on to now number 9, the annual departmental staff reports, the 5-year plan. Mary Kay, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to take a minute and share my screen with you. Kelly, I think I just need to have permissions. All right, so this is our 5-year financial plan, and it covers the years 2021, which we have an approved budget now, through to 2025. So the Regional Service Delivery Act regulation requires us to prepare multi-year budgets. And what this does is it really provides a framework for the board and management to operate within for the medium and the long term. As I've mentioned before, we never prepare annual budgets in isolation. We're always looking at what the impact will be to the future years. It's very easy to make an annual budget be anything that you want it to be. But what you can't control is what its impact will be down the line, which is why it's so important to consider what those future years look like. So our primary goal when we do this financial planning is to ensure the stable and predictable fees for the communities and the businesses that we serve. So some of the underlying assumptions that went into this 5-year financial plan, we assumed annual inflation rates of between 1% and 2%, which is what we've been seeing in the past. And we've also assumed that the current level of operations is maintained. So we haven't assumed that we've taken on any additional projects or let any projects fall by the wayside. This is just a status quo financial projection. Now, I like to say 2020 is the year of uncertainty. I'm sure you are all feeling that. When we went and prepared our 2021 budget, there was a lot of uncertainty. Projecting 5 years into the future is even more uncertain. So some of the things that we're seeing, obviously the effects of COVID-19, we don't know what the impact will be, but we know there'll probably be some. The other things that are out there right now with our new government, we know that there's changes in the Department of Environment and Local Government. We do know that there will probably be a focus on climate change and potential local governance reform. So how that will impact the RSC remains to be seen, but there likely will be some impact. The other uncertainties relate to solid waste specifically, and I'm going to let Brett speak a little bit to that.
Sure. Thanks, Mary Kay. I guess first, the environmental impact assessment. We've spoken about that already a bit tonight, and we've spoken about it briefly in previous meetings. There'll be a lot of benefits that flow out of that for not only the commission, but obviously the member communities. The most relevant one to speak about tonight, though, is the impact on self-construction costs. We could see a reduction in construction costs from, just as an example, and we'll see this a little later on in the presentation, but currently we're expecting self-construction costs in 2022, for example, to be about $2.1 million. We could see that reduced down to about $150,000 if we're successful. So obviously a huge impact for not only for the ratepayers, the businesses that we serve, also the member communities within our region. The next one I'll touch on is our packaging and printed paper processing. Lots of P's, a bit of a tongue twister, but we've spoken about that before too. And really what that refers to is an extended producer responsibility program where manufacturers would cover the recycling costs associated with their packaging. So a potential maximum value there probably for us of about $1.3 million per year, depending on how that program is designed, or it may be a portion of the cost that we incur for recycling. So another unknown still out there, and we're waiting for the province to release a final design for that program. And last but not least, and this is probably the most where the most uncertainty lies, is this provincial waste study. We really don't know a whole lot more about it other than it has happened. Dylan Consulting undertook it on behalf of the province before the pandemic began. They've completed their final report, submitted it to the province, and we're waiting on the results. Really don't know where that will go. In my experience, the last time I went through a provincial waste study would have been back in 2004. And what flowed out of that were some recommendations and guidelines on best practices. But I guess the best I can say on this latest study is we're not sure what the impact will be on us, but we know there will be some type of impact. So tough to factor that in on a 5-year plan. Mary Kay?
Thanks, Brett.
Yep.
So that brings us to our first division, corporate services. And as you all know, corporate services are the expenses that benefit all the various divisions. So we accumulate those expenses and then they are allocated out to the divisions based on their consumption, as you can see here. So I'm going to try to not go line by line. What I'd like to do is just provide a narrative of some of the items that have changed. And I do apologize. I understand that this slide is relatively small. You might have difficulty seeing some of the numbers because we had to make it so small just to fit on one slide. But what I would do is refer you to your board package. We sent you out the original spreadsheets in there, so the numbers should be able to be more readable for you. So on corporate services side, what we're seeing here is an average increase of about $15,000 per year, or 2.4%. So you can see from the 2021 approved budget to 2022, 2023, and then so on. And what's included in there is for salaries and benefits, as well as board honorariums, is a 2% cost of living adjustment. On the governance side, you'll see from 2021's budget to 2022's, it actually goes down. In 2021, we included an amount for board training, just because we will have new board members as a result of our municipal elections coming up. So that amount has been reduced in 2022 and further years. And then lastly, on the administrative side, we just have some small inflationary adjustments, as well as some discretionary adjustments in some of the spending. Maybe I'll just pause on each slide just to ask anybody if they have any questions. Feel free to dig into the numbers, even though I'm not going line by line, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Okay, I don't hear any questions.
Mike Chamberlain, I'd like to go back to the big expenses for 2022 in cell development, and perhaps Mary Kay, you could explain that if that cell doesn't have to be built or constructed, how it will change the entire five-year plan.
Sure. Would it be okay, Mike, if we get into, sorry, would it be okay if we get into that a little bit more when we get into the solid waste side of things?
Sure thing.
Okay, that'll be coming up in a few minutes. So the next division would be the regional planning services. So if we start with the expense side of things, we have two lines of expenses, and there's regional planning expenses, and then that allocation that comes over from corporate services that is charged to regional planning. So on the regional planning expenses, we've increased those by $5,000 per year for the next 5 years. And that's really just for contingency purposes, given the uncertainty with what's going to happen with the RSC. we will have that money built into our budget. If we don't need it, then it comes forward in the second previous year surplus anyway. So if you add those two line items together, you come up with the total expenses for the 5 years. Jumping back up to revenue, there's two sources of revenue. The first being what our membership pays, so the municipalities, the local service districts. And then the second is the second previous year surplus. And I just want to take a minute to talk about the second previous year surplus, because you will see this in all the divisions going forward. We're not able to include an amount in the projections because we are required to produce balanced budgets. So the province says you should be at a zero balance, so don't expect to run any surplus until it is actually produced. So until 2020 is finished and we know for sure what our surplus is, we can't assume anything on these lines for the next 4 years. However, management does a really good job of projecting out, making sure that we're controlling our costs so that we can have these second previous year surpluses carry forward, reducing the fees that are needed. So we try our very best to generate some level of surplus. What that will be, I can't include that in the projections just yet. So with that said, what that means is you're not getting the benefit of a reduction in second previous year surplus in 2022. So that means without that, your member fees would go up about $42,000 in 2022, and then about $7,000 per year from 2023 to 2025. Any questions on regional planning? Okay. So that brings us to the planning and development services budget. And again, we'll start with expenses, and I'll just try to highlight some of the changes that are in there. So overall, our average expenses, as you can see down here, went up about $42,000 per year, or 2.8% annually. What's included in there? Well, there's inflationary adjustments. As well on the administration side in 2023, as well as 2025, there's rental increases. That's in accordance with our rental agreement. And then the only other change is from 2021's budget to the projection in 2022 for building inspection. We now have a seasonal employee that's being brought on full-time with benefits, and that's just to meet the higher level of demand that the building inspection services is seeing. And the cost for that is approximately about $38,000 per year. So that's why you see the little bit of a jump from building inspection from one year to the next. So going back up to the top, you can see, again, the second previous year surplus is not carried forward for these 4 years, but there will likely be something, which means that contributions from participating members in 2022 jumps about $74,000. And then for the next 3 years, it's about a $33,000 increase per year. Any questions on that one? Okay. So that brings us to the solid waste services. Now, budgets and projections in this division entail a little bit more than the other divisions, and that's really just based on the nature of the operations. There's a whole lot more moving parts. So you have to consider, before you can even start to build your budget, you have to consider capital asset management, what you're going to purchase, how you're going to fund those purchases, so what you're going to borrow for. You have to consider your self-construction schedules and how you're going to pay for those, as well as how you're going to use your capital reserve funds to manage the payment of these expenses, and tonnage forecasts. So before we can even start to look at expenses, these are the kind of things that we need to check off. So we're going to go through those in a little bit more detail. And I'm going to turn it over to Brett, and he'll talk to you about capital asset management.
Thank you, Mary Kay. So we've said this before, but the goal is to obtain the lowest cost of ownership. And obviously, as assets age, we see maintenance costs increasing, downtime increases. As a result, we need to replace those machines with rentals, so costs increase there. And overall, the cost of ownership increases. Next slide. So we've included a couple of pictures just to illustrate. I mean, all of our operations, all of our areas of operations, both on the waste management side, in this case, it's a loader in our receiving floor area of our baling facility. Next slide, Mary Kay. Also in our construction activities, we're really machine intensive, very capital intensive. On the construction side, obviously, it would be for cell construction, mass excavation, road building, that type of thing. Next slide. And so I won't go through this table in detail. Rather, I'll give you the logic on how we develop it. But essentially what you're looking at is a schedule on when we're expecting to replace all of the machines in our fleet over the next 5 years. Now, not all the machines are included here, but this is the 5-year schedule. Very straightforward on how we put it together. All machines have a certain life cycle, certain life span measured in operating hours. And that'll typically range, depending on the type of machine and the application, somewhere between about 10,000 and 14,000 hours. The other factor that we take into account would be the number of hours that we use that machine for each year. And that may range somewhere between 1,500 hours and 3,000 hours per year. We divide the total lifespan by the number of hours used per year, and we're left with a lifespan or expected lifespan of the machine in years. And then we're able to plug it into this table and budget for it accordingly. Are there any questions on that? No? Mary Kay?
Thanks, Brett.
Yep.
So that brings us to our debt servicing. So the purchasing of the capital that Brett talked about impacts our debt. Typically what we do is any equipment that has a cost greater than $100,000 is financed through a debenture. So our current balance in our long-term debt outstanding is $4,614,000. And a few years ago, Regional Service Commission 11, we adopted a debt management policy, and that specified where we wanted to keep our debt levels. And so our internal debt service ratio target is this less than 15%. The way that this ratio is calculated is basically you take your total debt payments, which are your principal and your interest, and you divide them by your annual expenditure. And you want that target for RSC to be less than 15%. Now, the province has its own target. They would like municipalities to be within 20%. So you can see that we're even more conservative than what the province wants us to be at. And currently, our debt service ratio is actually 12.23%. So we're in very good shape with regard to our debt service ratio and the level of debt that we carry in the commission. So this slide just shows our current and projected debt repayments over the next 5 years, because those then flow into our budget. So the actual amount of debt that's outstanding and the repayments that correspond, you'll see here at the top. So these are debentures that have actually been issued for purchases that have already been made, and these are the principal and interest payments over the next 5 years. The estimated ones are based on the capital replacement schedule that Brett showed you. This is what we would finance over the next 5 years and the principal and interest that would correspond with them. So if you go down here, you'll see what total debt payments would be projected for the next 5 years. Then we estimate our expenditures, which are taken from our budget, and then dividing the debt payments by the expenditures, you come up with that debt service ratio. So what you see and what I want to highlight is in 2023, we are rapidly approaching our 15% maximum. So we're at 14.42. So getting close, that's a little bit cause for pause and say, okay, what's going on here? However, the good news is in 2023, our largest debenture, which was for the power generation facility, it was a 10-year debenture, is paid off. So we are freeing up almost well over $400,000. So you see in 2024 that our ratio actually drops to 11.32%. So no cause for concern. We've more than fixed our rapidly approaching 15% maximum target. And with that, we come to cell construction, and Brett will talk about that one.
Thank you. So cell costs, and by the way, Mike, if anytime you want to ask that question, I'd be happy to answer it, but I'll give you a preliminary explanation and maybe that'll preempt the question. Cell costs are influenced by a number of factors, and those include geomembrane requirements. For example, currently we don't use a geomembrane because we're doing what's called piggybacking, building one cell on top of another. But geomembranes are actually quite expensive and typically required in cells. The timeline of construction, if you have 2 years to do a mass excavation versus 10 years, that has an impact on cost. Size of the cell, that's the footprint of the cell, the volume of excavation required, and the geometry of the cell. That's going to have an impact on how large a footprint you have to construct to hold a given volume of waste. Next slide. So here's the cell construction cost table through 2026. Now, as you can see, while we're up top in 2021, we've got relatively inexpensive cells. 2021's estimated budget will be in the neighborhood of $700,000. The elephant in the room, thank you, Mary Kay, that's being highlighted is the 2022 cell. That's cell C1. And as we progress through the presentation, you'll see a little more information on where that's located, why it's so expensive to build. Anticipated cost is $2.1 million, largely to do with a lot of those factors that we just touched on, cell geometry, geomembrane requirements, and footprint of the cell, construction timeline. It's sort of a perfect storm. And then we see anticipated costs flattening out after that. C2 and C3 are both under, they're both multi-year cells, and they're both under $1 million. Next slide, Mary Kay. So this gives you a bit of context. This is an aerial view of our site. Currently, we're landfilling in the center of this slide on top of old landfill cells, bringing those up to final elevation, that 59-meter geodetic elevation. And that's a fairly cheap way of doing things. It doesn't involve a whole lot of excavation, and it doesn't involve geomembrane liners. However, in 2022, we'll be beginning construction on cell C1. We need to complete construction in 2022. And C1, as you can see, is in the top left-hand corner. You'll notice it's a corner cell, which means our requirements are that we build our cells with a 4-to-1 slope on the exterior. In this case, it has 2 4-to-1 slopes, which means it's sort of this tetrahedron shape with a large floor area and not a whole lot of volume. So we anticipate that to be by far the most expensive cell. The biggest driver in cost here, though, is excavation. To give you an idea of the excavation volume there, this will be a rough value, but it's between 1.5 and 2 cubic kilometers of soil need to be excavated to construct that cell. Next slide. This will give you a different perspective of the work or the work site, I should say. In the foreground, you can see where cell C6 was in the previous slide. We'll be landfilling in the foreground area around 2036. But in the background of this picture where those trees are and there's a large ridge line, that's the location of cell C1. We have to build down there first. The way you build landfill cells, you start at the bottom and typically work your way up. That way you're able to connect drainage, leachate piping together and drain it down to the leachate treatment pond, which is obviously at a lower elevation. And so in order to do that, we do have to excavate out that large mountain. And that is what we're trying to avoid with this EIA application that we'll be able to speak about in more detail in the next meeting. Next slide, Mary Kay. This is another perspective of where cell C1 is. Where obviously we've been excavating there for at least a couple years now. We're able to use that material elsewhere on site, and we're also planning on building a large visibility berm on the western perimeter of our site. But this gives you an idea of the elevation that we're dealing with. You can see the large white pine tree in the background there. We're at treetop elevation essentially, and we're moving a mountain. So that's what's really driving these costs as far as cell construction goes. We're looking at about $1 million in excavation costs. Next slide. Well, that's it on cell construction. Mike, did you still have a question on that? Mike, you're on mute.
Sorry. Just wanted to reiterate that if we don't have to go ahead with that, with building that cell in 2022, it's going to change the 5-year plan, would it not?
Oh yes, dramatically. Mary Kay?
Right.
Yeah, most definitely, Mike. It will completely change it.
So we would have to then do another 5-year plan to bring everybody up to date. Is that how it works?
That would be the plan. If the EIA is approved, and whenever that happens, we would completely revamp this with the new cell construction schedule.
Okay, thank you. I'm asking this question because I think other board members should, other than the finance committee, should be aware of this.
Oh, it's a great point.
On that point, if I might, anytime there would be a significant event that would impact the 5-year plan, we would come back to the board and say, this unknown or what we feared has happened or what we hoped has happened impacts us going forward, and here's how we see the future. And as previously mentioned, that EIA being approved would be one. I do think it's appropriate, however, for this part of the process, for us not to count on that.
I agree with you, Don.
Thanks, Don. So that brings us to our capital reserve fund. A number of years ago, the board approved a reserve fund policy. And as part of that policy, that specifies that the landfill will maintain a capital reserve fund balance of greater than $1.2 million. And what this does is it really allows for a number of things. First being flexibility for unanticipated capital projects. A number of years ago, we were able to purchase land adjacent to the landfill. And that was done through the capital reserve, because if we had to pay for that through operations, we just wouldn't have been able to afford it. Another thing it allows for is protection from unanticipated failures or disasters. Again, a few years ago, we did have a leachate force main failure. That cost about $700,000 to repair. That was able to be funded through a capital reserve fund rather than running a significant deficit in that annual budget. And then lastly, it provides protection from potential rate shock for the ratepayer. And we're going to see that in this projection. We're looking at a cell cost, if the EIA isn't approved, of $2.1 million in 2022. If we didn't have a capital reserve fund to be able to draw on, we'd be looking at a $20 tipping fee increase in 1 year. So having that capital reserve balance allows us to smooth those tipping fee increases and not provide that shock to the ratepayer. So the last variable to look at before we can start building our budget is tonnage. Garbage revenue is our single largest line item in our budget, and it's one that we have virtually no control over. Whatever tonnage comes in, that's what we have to deal with. So what we have seen in the last number of years is tonnage typically falls in the 78,000 to 79,000 tons per year if there's no flooding. The last 2 years have been flood years in 2018, 2019. So we have seen higher than typical tonnage, which is a good thing from the landfill perspective. But we can't count on floods every year. We don't want to see that, obviously. So what we've used in this projection is 79,000 tons per year. So with all of those factors in play, this is a summary of what that impact will be. So what you're seeing here is you have a landfill budget with revenues and expenses generating a surplus. You have a recycling budget with revenues and expenses generating a deficit. The surplus and the deficit, get added together to come up with your balanced solid waste budget. So when we get into the details, what is included in there in your 2021, you've already approved the budget at the board level, and the tipping fee will be $99 per ton. In 2022, what our recommendation is, based on the construction schedule that we have right now, is a further $5 increase, which would bring the tipping fee to $104 per ton. And then from 2023 to 2025, we're recommending holding the tipping fee at $104 per ton. We feel like we can meet our expense level at that tipping fee number, and we're able to repay our capital reserve, which we're going to be using to fund some of that large self-construction costs in 2022. So just another summary here. These are the capital projects that will be ongoing for the next 5 years, and this is how they're going to be paid for. So you can see this is what the operating budget will pay for. So that's paid for from your tipping fee. The capital reserve will pay for the following, and the thing I want to highlight here is because we have that $2.1 million cell cost, we are recommending taking the $1,210,000 out of that capital reserve to offset some of those expenses. And then this is what will be funded through a debenture. So these are your big major capital purchases, those equipment purchases. So these would be funded through the Municipal Capital Borrowing Board. So with all of that information said, this is the level of reserve funds that will be in each reserve fund over the next 5 years. And the one I want to highlight is the capital reserve, because what that means is in 2022, if we jump down here, when we take the $1,210,000 out of that capital reserve, it leaves a balance of only $400,000 at that point in time. So it's well below the recommended per our policy of 1.2 million. However, that's what the reserve fund is there for. And we also have a plan to be able to repay that reserve fund and get it back up to its pre levels, or what we recommend of 1.2 million within 2 years. So you'll see by the end of 2024, we expect to be back up to 1,295,000. So this is really the details behind what's in the budget. So I'm just going to highlight some of the changes from year to year. So what you're seeing on the revenue side, for regular garbage, you have your budget that's approved for 2021 at $99 per ton, 79,000 tons. In 2022, that's $104 per ton at 79,000 tons, and then it stays the same for the next 3 years. Construction and demolition is the same for the entire 5-year period. And then the second previous year surplus, although we will likely have something, has not been included. So there is potential that we could see less than a $5 tipping fee increase if we did have a second previous year surplus, enough to offset that a little bit. And then this is the large amount that's coming in from the capital reserve fund to fund that large sale of $2.1 million. On the expense side, besides inflationary adjustments, which is across the board, the differences that you're seeing in baler costs, you actually see a reduction from 2021 to 2022. And you may recall in our 2021 budget, we included a one-time cost for the conveyor system. So that's completed in 2021. So 2022's projection comes down accordingly. Our debt servicing, that fluctuates obviously based on our debt levels, and that slide that we looked at earlier on in the presentation. So those jump around each year. And then our capital expenditures, those will also fluctuate depending on what's going on. So what you see here is we have 700,000 cell costs in 2021, 2.1 million cell costs in 2022, nothing built in 2023, and then cell costs of 420,000 in 2024. So we're back to building cells every 2 years, which is typically what we've been doing in the past. And those are the major changes. Oh, one more thing I should highlight, I guess. We will have money in 2023 and 2024, as I mentioned in the previous slide, to start repaying the capital reserve fund. So these are transfers to the capital reserve fund to build that back up to levels that we're currently at. So that's the landfill. Then the recycling, we have revenues, and that's just adjusted for inflationary measures. Those tend to fluctuate based on market conditions too. So sometimes the market prices go down, sometimes they go up. So they will be adjusted accordingly when we do our annual budgets. And then on the expense side, besides inflationary measures, the only one that I should highlight is the debt servicing, which tends to fluctuate based on what we're purchasing for our capital. So that is solid waste in a nutshell. Any questions there?
Mary Kay, I just have a comment. Thank you very much. And that was quite a nutshell.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, so that brings us to our last division, which is the power generation. And there's really two major inputs that go into this budget. The first being the gas production, and then the second is what is required of the engines with regard to a retrofit. So we knew back when the engines were installed in 2012 that the 60,000 hourly maintenance interval was going to be a big one. So basically, you pull the engine out and you completely retrofit it, and then it goes back in and it's like a new engine. So we knew that it was going to be a major cost, and it was something that we were looking to have money set aside in a capital reserve fund to be able to pay for, potentially borrow. We weren't really sure, but at this point, with the way that the fund has been going, we do anticipate that we will be borrowing for that retrofit. So the retrofit is about $600,000 to $700,000 per engine. And the good thing is we can do it in 2 different years, so 2022, 2023. So for each year, rather than pay for that through operations, we're going to borrow that. And that allows us to balance our budget in those years and then pay for it over the next 5 years. So that's what you're going to see when we get there. So on the revenue side, in 2021's budget, we actually reduced our budgeted revenue. We used to be at 1 million. We just weren't hitting that. So we reduced it to 800,000. It's a much more realistic target. And for the next 5 years, we've just increased it by 2% per year. We usually get the benefit of when the EUB gives a recommendation. So we'll be getting a small cost of living adjustment there. One thing you will note is in the past couple of years, we have transferred money from the solid waste operating fund in order to bring the budget into a balanced position. We're not calling for any of that from 2022 to 2025. So the fund will be paying for itself, which is always good news. And so on the expense side, under operational costs, 2022 includes the retrofit of engine 1, and then 2023 includes the retrofit of engine 2, sorry. So what you're seeing in 2022, we estimate that we would borrow about 588,000. And you see that come in, that repayment come in 2023. So you see the jump up from 2022. And then in 2023, we would borrow roughly about 700,000 for that retrofit. And the reason that the amount is increasing from 2022 to 2023, the borrowing, is just to balance the fund. So the costs are the same for both refits of both engines. It's just the amount that we're borrowing that we're adjusting. And then you see what that's going to cost. So to borrow for the 2 engines, principal and interest over the next 5 years would be about 286,000. You see that right here. And then once that 2023 happens and we pay off that large debenture, that original one from 2012, we're actually going to start generating a small profit, which is nice. So we anticipate we'll have surpluses in the range of about 44,000, 40,000, and we'll start putting that to our reserve fund until it meets the minimum target that we have set as part of the reserve fund policy. And that really brings us to the end, but I would be happy to take any questions or comments if anybody does have any.
Any questions or comments? I don't see anyone's hand up.
Just a comment. I think she does a very good job at breaking them down for us.
She does an excellent job.
She
She's good
does.
with the figures. Well, there's no questions or comments. So Mary Kay, I'd like to thank you and also Brett for an excellent presentation. It was great. Thank you.
So Madam Chair, if I might, if it's the board's pleasure, we would appreciate a motion adopting this to be the commission's 5-year plan. That provides us with direction in developing your annual budgets. We're going to have a new board seated after the municipal elections, and there will be new members, and it will provide them with some decision-making context and us a basis for orientation. So that would be nice. I would like to add that what you've seen here is kind of a tip of an iceberg. In addition to what you've seen, we have capital asset replacement schedules that go out beyond 5 years, that look at every piece of equipment. We have debt, we have land development plans with respect to the landfill that go out beyond the 5 years. And these documents allow us to react to the inevitable unforeseen items that will come up.
Thank you, Don.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I was just going to move that we adopt the 5-year plan. Mike Blaney.
Thank you. Chris. Have a seconder. Chris, a second. Any discussion? Ready for the question?
Question.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. And again, it was an excellent presentation. Now, just before I have a motion to move into closed session, Kelly, are you going to take it off of live streaming?
You're muted.